Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a fantastic day so far. Today I want to answer the question. Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer it, but this is the topic I want to talk about. Is it the right time to be talking about entrepreneurship? That is the question. And this has come based on the fact I was inspired by the Diary of a CEO conversation between Daniel Priestley and Gary Stevenson, in addition to the fact that the world has been going through a lot of change, especially in the last 5 years. Of course, in the last 5 years, we've had, of course, the COVID pandemic, which took our lives for 2.5 to 3 years. We also have had, rises in energy costs. We've also had rises to inflation and interest rates. We've seen the Ukraine and Russia war play out, in addition to Israel and Palestine and many other wars that have been happening across the globe, including in Africa, Asia, and other countries as well, continents, should I say, as well. And so with that in mind, there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of tension. We've got the tariff wars that are happening at the moment. We've got changes in polarization of political power. And so there are some countries that are doing better than others. But of course, globally, we're all feeling the net effect of, I guess, challenging times, so to speak. And one way in which we can measure sort of like how a country is doing is based on a multitude of different factors. Of course, a lot of people who are interested in politics or geopolitics or sort of like the economy, so to speak, is speaking on productivity. So how productive is a country? Well, of course, that's not the only measure of success in many people's eyes. Another measure of success is the disparities in inequalities. That is another measure of success, so to speak. And another way to measure success is centered around well-being. Okay, so what is the outlook of the UK or another country? And of course, if you're looking for this information in these statistics, there are multiple different sources you can go to. Of course, the central source that, again, the public sector, or at least the government, reports on is the Office of National Statistics. And so coming back to this question of entrepreneurship, is it a good time to talk about it? Well, let's think about some challenges and why I'm coming to this point. I've spoken about changes that are happening. An indirect sort of outcome or output of these changes has meant that there has been increased demand for jobs, and those increased demands have been based on the fact that it's been really expensive to essentially hire for things or pay for things if you're an organization, a business, a startup, an SME, whatever it may be. Things are getting more expensive. Of course, in light of Brexit, there have been some changes to trade rules, and of course prices have gone up, and things are slightly different is what I'm saying. I say slightly different, very different. And so the cost to export certain goods, into the country for a business has become more expensive. So with those expenses, it means that products within the UK and or services have gone up, which means the cost of living has gone up, which means that when it comes to sort of like, recruiting individuals into an organization or business or whatever it may be, it's more expensive because there is a higher demand for pay. Now, of course, wages have gone up, but have they gone up in line with inflation and the cost of living? No, so it's a mile off. And so with that in mind, we're in this deficit of affording our lives, so to speak. We're in a deficit. And it's a situation where if we're thinking about the productivity of the country, it is heavily based on the fact that the country has high sort of like different sources of tax. And also we're heavily dependent on services, namely financial services. So if you've got a country that is dependent upon tax, such as income tax or national insurance or whatever it may be, as their main source of income, in addition to financial services, which could mean a whole roster of different things. This could be, I don't know, let's say, for example, loan services, credit card services, financial advice, etc., etc. Then that says something about the inherent substance and value of a country in terms of what they can produce. Okay, because there isn't variation in terms of the sort of ways in which it makes money. Okay, it doesn't talk to how, it just talks about the different ways. Okay, what are the different ways? So there's that to think about. And so when we think about all of these different things, as well as the uncertainty that's happening across the globe in terms of, do we still have a special relationship with with the US? Do we still want it? I'm sure some people would say yes, because we're not crazy, in a sense that we need the protections and we kind of need to be yes sir, yes master to the US because they're bigger, badder and bolder than us. Or do we completely forge our own way, like completely? It's interesting because the Brexiteers would say that we needed to leave the EU, but would they also say that we need to discard our relationship with the US as well? Like, to what end? Like, what end are we sort of like moving to, if that makes sense? So again, a lot of these changes start to create a sort of climate where it feels uncomfortable. If I haven't even spoken about AI and tech, okay, so with the whole AI and tech space, again, there is this whole fear, and it's a genuine fear, by the way, that there will be a lot of individuals who will be losing the opportunity to progress in roles or get a certain job or whatever it may be. I'm thinking about graduates, okay, graduates who come out of university where they may be getting a junior role or a level entry role, and essentially they may not have the same opportunities because AI has replaced them. And it's not quite AI replacing them, it is the individual who can use AI well that is replacing that role. So when I think about, some of the stuff that I do, let's say, for example, there may be situations where, if there was a board meeting that I was part of, there would be somebody who would be writing the minutes and all that kind of stuff there. You don't really need that person anymore, because you have these tools that can essentially, again, translate what people are saying, transcribe what people are saying, and you can get other generative AI tools that can look at that transcript and produce minutes. Of course, you need someone to overlook it and all this kind of stuff there to ensure that it's accurate based on what's there. So yes, you may need a person, but the length of time that they're required to do that stuff may not be as long, especially if there is an efficiency in terms of the process. So I say this to say that, yeah, there are roles at threat. And so with all of this stuff looming, difficult to find jobs, recruitment hard, everyone's sort of using generative AI when it comes to, finding a role or applying for a role, developing their CVs, etc., etc. You'll get a pool of people, a high pool of people who are within the generic space. So a lot of people are doing the same stuff, and therefore it doesn't stand out, or they're not doing things that enables them to stand out. If they are calling sort of like recruiters and stuff, assuming that they're on point, then yes, they have a better chance. But you only know what you know, right? So with that in mind, it's a difficult one. As you start thinking, what are some of the solutions? Now, of course, going back to that Diary of a CEO debate, should I call it? I guess, yeah. Debate between Daniel Priestley and Gary Stevenson. Daniel Priestley was hot on the fact that entrepreneurship is a part solution, so to speak. But there are a huge community of individuals who believe that actually entrepreneurship is not something we should be singing about. We shouldn't be talking about starting a business or whatever it may be, or at least not that we shouldn't be, but it's not the only solution. Now, it's interesting because I don't know if people believe that Daniel Priestley was saying that was the only solution. By the way, this is not a defending sort of like video. This is me just sort of like exercising the question. But I don't think he was saying that was the only solution. I think that's the only solution, well, one of the main solutions he's heavily been thinking about, because obviously he's passionate about the whole thing. But is it viable for the average person? The answer is probably no. And I say that confidently because in order to be an entrepreneur that is successful, it is so combinational that it's hard to give a distinct, like a precise response to it. You need luck. You need expertise to a degree. You need skin in the game. You need knowledge. You need support and help. You may need investment. You may need the technology. You may need the time. You may need the effort. Like, it's all of that stuff combined. There's a whole bunch of stuff combined. And so for people who are not willing to give it a go, who don't want to give it a go, who don't believe they need to, I think that's perfectly okay. But for many others, actually many others is not the right word. For some others, should I say, it is the way, it is the solution. Because let's think about it. Even if you are making more money, doing double shifts or whatever it may be, the way it is set up at the moment, especially if you're in the emerging middle class or whatever it may be, or going from lower socioeconomic to higher socioeconomic or middle socioeconomic, then you're going to be taxed more effectively, and you won't necessarily keep the majority of your income. So for those individuals who are banning entrepreneurship, in their mind at least, what I think they're thinking is, I need to make so much money that it doesn't even affect me like that. Now that's from an individual standpoint. So that's the first point. The second point is, even if these individuals sort of like make it through as, let's say, a profitable entrepreneur that is grossing, I don't know, 5 million a year, 10 million a year, 2 million a year, whatever it looks like, are they actually going to employ people within the UK? Well, let's think of the reasons for and against. Well, why would you employ someone in the UK? Well, if you're used to sort of like meeting up with your work colleagues or your direct reports or whatever it may be, it's a great way to do that. There's familiarity in terms of language and culture and all those different things there. You may feel like there may be a high level of reliability only based on the fact that, 9 times out of 10, you'll be on the same page in terms of how you communicate. And of course, when we're thinking about, and this is only if this is important, it may not be important at all, because you may have a process sort of business or a role given to an individual that is very process driven, where, essentially, because of the fact that the UK has a high academic throughput, then again, you may get higher quality in terms of what you do. What are some of the cons though? Hiring somebody within the UK may be more expensive. There is a question in terms of like, I guess, rights and everything else. That sounds so wrong. What I mean by that is, I think because there is a certain expectation within the UK in terms of work culture, it's different. It's definitely different, and so that's what I mean. I'm not really talking about rights. Rights are important, of course. What other things come into play? I don't know what else there is. I guess it's cheaper outside of the UK, and you can also get similar or close to similar outputs. So even if entrepreneurship was badged, are we still benefiting another country or economy, etc., etc.? And the question is, we probably are benefiting another economy, because thinking about this, are you now going to pay a virtual assistant within the UK £2,500 as an example, relative to paying £650 when you're going to get similar output? That's a question for you guys. But obviously, this may be based on your pocket. This may be based on ethics. This may be based on your sense of purpose. All of these things come into mind. So money is a big factor in all of this. So how do those conditions reverse or change? Well, I guess it's ensuring that the climate for entrepreneurship, if this is one of the solutions, is conducive to ensuring that these entrepreneurs feel like they can actually grow. So whether this is looking at incentives, whether this is looking at tax, whether this is looking at upskilling. Upskilling is a big one, okay? Because, I believe we are in the position we're in right now. If you look at the FTSE 100 versus, the S&P 500, over the last couple of years, the FTSE 100, this is basically the top 100 companies within the UK, it's just flat. It hasn't really gone up. Whereas if you compare the S&P 500, which includes the Magic 7, which Daniel Priestley talks to, which is the top 7 companies in the firm, which are all tech companies, the main brands, they're included in that, and they're kind of like the 80-20 that pull the rest of the S&P. But we don't have a Magic 7. We don't even have a Magic 100. So with that in mind, it's like times are hard. But if we did have, let's say, a Magic 5 within the UK, or even a Magic 3, that would probably do some wonders for the UK. But I can't help but think that it's very disproportionate to entrepreneurship. So does this encourage sort of like growth elsewhere. So what am I saying? What am I talking about in terms of growth? Well, what this may do is it encourages investment into the UK, into those different businesses. It may encourage opportunity for infrastructure to be invested into based on the stuff that is being done. It may also inspire other individuals to feel like actually there are opportunities in the market. Of course, this is all entrepreneurship based. But on the flip side, it may produce jobs, and or it may force, quote unquote, the government to think about how they tax entrepreneurs, so to speak. Okay, sorry, I saw a fly, so I was just like not randomly waving. So with that in mind, like those are some of the things that could happen. But the rate of change in which that happens, in terms of, again, the government making those changes and or opportunities being sort of like available to 9 to 5ers, we don't know what that rate looks like. Is it enough to make a difference? And some people may say no, it's not. And so you kind of need to have, that can't be the only solution. I think it is definitely one of the solutions for sure, for those people who want to take it. But I think that's one of the solutions. I think the other solution that we're looking at is, how do we create sort of like pressure? So there are definitely sort of like, I don't know what they're called, but you know when you like there's this people put these surveys out, these government surveys out, or are they pledges or reforms or change? I don't know what they're called, but essentially if you get a certain number of votes, then it has to be discussed, in the Houses of Parliament or whatever it may be. Maybe there are things like that need to be generated that are specific to this type of question. So if you're watching this, maybe you put pressure on government that way. I know people talk about protesting X, Y, and Z. I don't know how much that does, because I'm thinking protesting is good for what it does, but does it incite real change? It creates awareness for sure. And that's one thing that's important. But I think another thing is, how do you play the political game in numbers? Like the way I think about it is, how do you give people enough awareness of the issues, in addition to, and issues in a way that are done as objectively as possible. So it's not just going to be based on facts and figures. If we think about a public speaker, okay, a public speaker is good based on the fact that they incorporate data and information. They incorporate good storytelling, and they're also able to empower and inspire. Okay, so a culmination of those different things will create strong arguments. So if you had Daniel Priestley and Gary Stevenson combined, that would be wow, because Gary came with the stories and the passion, and then Daniel came with the measuredness and the data. Okay, and of course they're interchangeable, so to speak. But I'm just sort of like polarizing it, so to speak, on purpose. But a combination of those two would be powerful. So how do you play the political game in such a way where there is that awareness? Okay, that was the first one. But also you understand how the process and the system works to actually incite those changes. Because then when you have that en masse, then it's a problem. Change is more likely going to happen because you understand how to play the game. And it's just not just one person. It is a group of people who understand how to play the game. It kind of needs to be so deep and systemic that it just makes sense, you know. And I guess with that in mind, it's also thinking about what can you do locally. What can you do locally? You know, what can you do locally to, again, remind your local MPs of what's happening, to speak to your friends and family about understanding the state of your country, okay? So, if we come back to it, the whole idea of speaking about entrepreneurship and stuff, I don't think it's wrong to talk about entrepreneurship, but I do think it's a sensitive time. For sure. It's a sensitive time, you know. There are some people who are just like, no, it's not about starting a business. These entrepreneurship bros and all this kind of stuff there. Mind you, the women are killing it within the entrepreneurship space. They just may not be as loud about it on the socials like that. But the women are killing it, 100%. So I don't think this is a bro or sister thing or whatever it may be. There is certain individuals who are definitely, again, more for the entrepreneurship bandwagon. It's either work for them, not working for them, or they're trying to work it out. Okay, that's okay. That's okay. It doesn't mean they're not for the other stuff. But then for those people who are, again, not for it, then they should do the not for it bit really well. Be diligent in their current places of work, have the right level of advocacy, understand what are the ways in which they can make change. So I don't think this is an against thing. Just everyone have their different roles. Everybody wants a more effective and more fruitful society. That doesn't necessarily mean fairer or doesn't necessarily mean more practical, but it just needs to make sense for the majority of people. Okay, if we're thinking about the utilitarian argument, because we're not necessarily going to please everyone. We're just not. So we have to balance between the two. There has to be the right balance of the social outlook in terms of inequalities, but there also has to be the right balance of productivity when it comes to economics. What does that specifically look like? So you're going to have to use the two anyway. We already know about the statistic of, 50, I think it's 90% of entrepreneurs fail is either in their first year or first 5 years. I never remember. So it's a hard stint anyway. But the skill set, the sort of like the ambition behind having the entrepreneurial mindset is still a useful thing to have, especially within your 9 to 5. I think they call it the entrepreneur. So there is intrapreneurship, where you're a dedicated, diligent, consultant-minded individual potentially. You don't have to be consultant-minded, but you get the point. You have the skill set to be really diligent on what you do. But there's also an individual who wants to create. So it's not just like, taking money from someone else necessarily, but it's creating this thing and then obviously providing a product or service that is useful and meaningful. Okay. So yeah, there are these different things to think about. I think the other thing I want to talk to is the fact that, when we're talking about entrepreneurship, what do we actually mean? That's a whole different conversation, and are you allowed to, do, and who's deciding this stuff? Because I feel like there are people shouting on both sides. Are you allowed to do the whole course thing or coaching thing or mentoring thing or whatever it may be? What signifies someone as doing that in the right way, and what signifies as somebody not doing that in the right way? What lives outside of that? Is this brick and mortar business? Is this your standard property style type business? Is this, you have employees and etc., etc.? Like, what is deemed as suitable entrepreneurship? Bearing in mind, it's hard to do anyway. So there are going to be different layers and different types of entrepreneurship that exist. Or is this just asking for too much permission? And you're just like, actually, I don't care what people say. This is what I want to do. And there are people who will genuinely benefit from it, because obviously, the only thing I will say confidently is there has to be integrity behind what you're doing. There has to be, you're not going to get everything right. And this is for the people who are going down the entrepreneurship route, but there has to be integrity. And you may get something wrong, believing that you have the utmost integrity as possible. Okay. But then you have to make a decision. Was your heart in the right place or not? Because people are going to break it down anyway, especially here in the UK. It's just naturally how we're wired, so to speak. So all of these different things to think about. What else is in my notes that I could pick up? So yeah, we're living in hard times at the moment. We're living in hard times, mainly because of all the changes that are happening, especially with government, especially with our productivity outlook, our inequalities outlook, and our social well-being outlook as well. But I do think it's okay to still want to pursue entrepreneurship if this is something you want to do. I am not saying it's the only option though. For those of you who have followed my channel before, I talk about the portfolio career, and I talk about the fact that we are naturally in a state and space where the portfolio career is a thing that is very much the way a career is run right now. So it's moving away from creation, it's moving away from pursuit to creation, should I say. And so that doesn't necessarily mean entrepreneurship. I know I talk about independent consulting, contracting, all of that stuff there. That is one type of portfolio career. But there are other types. Maybe you are a full-time person working within the British Library as an example, okay? And you are a manager within that space. But there are also other things that you like to do. Maybe you're a non-executive director for something. Maybe you're volunteering for something. Maybe you are starting up your own business, so to speak. Okay. So there are going to be different categories of stuff, but it will mainly sit into some sort of investing, some sort of business or entrepreneurship, some sort of employment, some sort of volunteering, some sort of advisory. It's mainly in those things. And then I think outside of that, you could argue, if we're breaking down the business, there could be software as a service, or platform as a service, or just general one-to-one or one-to-many services. Could be consulting, contracting, coaching, advisory, mentoring, counseling, all of that kind of stuff there. It could be brick and mortar. So you've got your different categories. So it's different for different types of people. So we are within the portfolio career space, and this is naturally what's going to happen. And some people may say, well, portfolio career is not the best thing to do. And I would say you may be right, but that depends on your circumstances. And those circumstances are heavily determined based on your current environment, okay, in terms of the people in your life, the demands that you have, the job that you're doing or may be doing or looking for, and what your ambitions and goals are, But again, entrepreneurship might be part of that portfolio career. So a very convoluted video today. But I think the point I wanted to make is it's okay to pursue entrepreneurship if this is something that you want to do, but it's not necessarily going to be the only answer to fixing the UK if that is one of your sort of like focuses, because there are other ways in which it needs to be done. But it is one type of solution, whether it has a big impact or small impact. And even if you don't even care about any of that stuff, and it's more focused on what you want to do for yourself and maybe your community at large, then it's your goal at the end of the day, So take this as you will. Yeah, the sands are shifting all the time. If you've got any comments in relation to this, feel free to leave them below. Again, I have a newsletter that talks about how you can cultivate the consultant mindset, because I believe it's a mindset that will be useful for individuals that are interested in developing those types of skills centered within developing the right level of strategic insight, developing the right level of problem solving, and utilizing frameworks and methodologies in order to solve a unique problem for their target audience, whatever that may look like, both useful within a 9-to-5 permanent employment, or contracting or consulting, or whatever that looks like, or even in your personal lives. So feel free to subscribe to the newsletter below and find out more information there. If you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers, anything centered around contracting, consulting, independent consulting that is, or anything centered around what I'm calling soft economics, then feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.